Trailer laid and whiz on past. Miss my head, left turn, watch the crimson flow, brother man.
Hello YouTubers, and welcome back to the MRC Racing channel. No, I did not die, though it may seem so. It has been nearly 2 years since my last video, and I do sincerely apologize. It's not that I didn't want to make any more videos, but I did not know it was going to be this popular, and you know, even though my editing may not seem that good, it does take quite a lot of time to make these videos. So with my day job and then doing all this racing stuff on the side, I just never had the time. So I do apologize for the 2-year wait for the video, and I hope that some of you coming across this that are getting your notification, thank you for subscribing. I hope that some of you get excited that I've got another video out. So we are going to go over a few things, basically what's happened in the last 2 years. Also, I'm sure many of you, in fact most of my subscribers, are Supra fans, and I'm sure many of you that have subscribed hit that little button because of my '89 Toyota Supra. So we will be going over what happened to that. So, what exactly happened to the 1989 Toyota Supra that many of you were so enthusiastic about seeing it finished? Well, obviously, it's behind me, right? It hasn't been crashed, and I'm not sure if you can see it from where you're sitting, but there are bugs and insects plastered all over the front, which is a good sign. But there's no engine in it, which is a bad sign. So, what actually happened? Well, basically, most of you are only going to know what has happened based on, what I was building, based on my YouTube progress. And that was a stock 7M GTE engine that I was going to push up to around 600 horsepower. Unfortunately, that engine, it did make its way in the car, and as you can see, it looked quite beautiful. I was very proud of my work here. As you can see, these were basically when it had been finished, and some things had been changed here and there, but basically this is how it went out driving the very first time. The engine lasted roughly 30 minutes until it spun a rod bearing. So what happened? Maybe I don't know how to build engines. Well, maybe, but what I actually found out was the aftermarket piston manufacturers for factory cast pistons. You need to be very careful because some of them must have modeled their pistons off of the naturally aspirated design and then simply lowered the compression. So what ended up happening on my engine was, because I had upgraded the oiling system, the oil squirters underneath the pistons, they're not like some of the newer engines where they point straight up at the piston. They basically aim at a 45, and that basically hits the cylinder wall with enough pressure, as it turns out, that with a piston designed for an NA engine that do not have oil squirters underneath, the gas ports on the pistons that went up into the oil control rings should not have been designed that way for a turbo engine that's got oil squirters on it. So I went out first time with the car about midnight, so it was pitch black out. Didn't really have anyone following me. I had people on standby in case something were to have happened, since a lot of things had been done in the car. Car drove great. It actually drove fantastic. Started right up. It was a long journey to the point of it starting once the engine was in. But the basics of it, it burned about 2 quarts of oil in the 30 miles-ish that it drove. And it's quite, I can't quite explain the feeling. because it obviously spun a rod bearing, so the crankshaft was ruined. All of that work, the pistons were fine, but basically one rod had a rod bearing that had spun, so that rod was basically garbage. You can get them resized, but I thought, you know, basically, what am I going to do? So my options were to cut the crankshaft down and use undersized bearings, which I didn't like that idea. Japanese cranks don't like that very much, so I decided against that, and I decided to put the remaining amount of money that I had, that I was going to use in the car, towards a new late style, an actual 7M crankshaft from a late 90s, early 90s Supra, and they balance better, and they resemble a 2JZ crankshaft. So that one worked a bit better. Got one of those. I got Eagle H-beam forged rods and Wiseco pistons. Now, when I was going assembling the engine, I deleted the oil squirters, basically got it back together, got it running, and it lasted about 100 miles, and then I started having ignition triggering issues with the stock cam crank sensor. So I ditched that setup and went with a 36 tooth wheel on the crankshaft, and still used the factory cam sensor up on the camshaft, and that worked absolutely wonderfully. It drove even better than it did before, which actually drove better than the factory car did. Full sequential injection, full coil unplug, as you could see from the photos. So everything, it was starting to come together, but it seemed like every time I still hadn't got a chance to tune it yet, because I was still sort of getting little niggles worked out of it. But the car did drive well, and it did not smoke anymore, and it made great power on wastegate boosted, about 15 pounds, and it made excellent power then, actually. The car was fun to drive, everything was working good. And then one day I went out to start the car, and I looked underneath, and it just so happened it was puking oil out of the front of the timing cover, and I'm like, okay, well, this is not good. So I inspected further. I ended up having to pull the front timing cover off, and I didn't know that these engines had this issue when I built the engine, and I wish I had, because the oil drive shaft that drives the oil pump from the timing belt had basically done the common failure where it pulls I would attribute it to my oil pressure, my oiling system upgrades. So I had the stiffened spring. I didn't use shims like most people use. I used a billet spacer that I found on eBay, and with a helper spring. That helped oil pressure, but it still wasn't very good. I had quite wide clearances in my bearings because of the power I was planning to run. So I ended up swapping out the factory oil filter housing and went with a remote oil filter that ran it through the cooler constantly. I know that's kind of frowned upon by some people, but as long as you warm up the oil good before you start ripping around on it, you're fine. And I found it to be a great solution. My oil pressure was wonderful. It was around 80 when it was cold, fully warmed up around 55. So I was very happy with that. But that added strain on the oil pump, it's a helical cut gear, and it does suck the shaft into the engine block, and it wore away at the collar, and it actually pulled it inside, and so the oil was coming out that seal, which was no longer sealing, because the journal that the seal rode on had now moved, and it was not in the seal anymore, so oil was puking out. So there's a company, forgive me, I don't know the name off the top of my head, over in Australia that makes a CNC Torrington bearing. It's basically a roller bearing that you replace a bunch of components on that shaft, and then it can ride against the bearing. It actually has oiling ports in it. So if you've got a 7M and you've got modified oiling system, I highly recommend going with that setup. So that fixed my oil, but So I did that, so I fixed it once more, major surgery for the most part. Doing it in the car is not the most fun. So I did that, and yeah, I went out to tune the car, and I tuned it on pump gas, 91 octane, started to turn the boost up, got around 22 to 23 pounds of boost on 91, and the car loved it. It was getting very fast, and I ended up switching to ethanol, E85, and turned the boost up even more, and the car was running extremely well. It was driving like a factory car with crazy amounts of power. I was spinning the wheels in 4th gear, so I don't know what it was making for power, but I know it was making a lot. Definitely 600 horsepower plus. And the engine was doing absolutely fine. Everything was working. I was finished. I was doing some longer pulls, 4th gear pulls, basically because it was spinning 3rd gear. 32 pounds of boost, and my intake air temperature looked great. Everything looked fantastic. I made a 4th gear pull, and something didn't quite feel right on that pull, and I thought, it felt down on power. So I slowed down, and I wanted to make another pass and see if it was different. Well, what actually happened was the little coolant nipple underneath of the intake manifold that feeds the throttle body in the stock setup, I wasn't using it, and I had it capped off with a rubber cap, and that broke. So a 5-cent part ruptured, and it dumped all the coolant out. And because on the intake side there really isn't anything hot enough, and because mine doesn't have a lot of the factory stuff in the way, I could not smell it. I did not know until the second 4th gear pull that I was out of coolant. So, blew the head gasket. Mainly the cylinder head was fine. It was slightly warped, but only about, it really would have been cleaned up with about 3/1000. So I sold that. Basically, but because of my tolerances was so close on the piston to wall clearance was so tight, because I was running ethanol, which runs a bit cooler, and I didn't plan to make huge amounts of power, but I wanted to make it so that it was a day-to-day a very drivable car at that 600 to 700 horsepower. Because the block, it got so hot that the pistons basically did not fit in the bore anymore, so it scuffed the pistons up enough to where I could not fix them and reuse them. Now, this whole time, basically nothing was wrong with the 7M. Nothing was wrong with the engine I built other than the oil pump shaft being pulled in, but that's common on them. If I had to fix that, really this engine was extremely reliable, and I pulled it apart, bearings looked good, everything looked great. It's just that, it's just a string of bad luck. And unfortunately, I lost my drive to keep going with the old 7M. So yeah, I scrapped the whole plan to do that, and I pulled the 2JZ out from the corner of the shop, and I've been working on that now. So I've been trying to sell the entire setup from the 7M, so ECU, wiring harness, intake manifold, exhaust manifold, turbo, all that stuff is for sale. Obviously, if you're watching this 10 years later, right, 2030, it's not hopefully still for sale. Hopefully I've sold it by then, because this is going to fund my 2JZ build. So basically, I know a lot of you were very, very excited about the 7M build because no one gives them a chance. And I kind of feel a bit guilty for giving up on that, but it's just, I had the engine in and out of the car so many times, fixing things I didn't like, or small problems with it, and I just got tired of it, and I lost interest, and it happens with a lot of people, obviously. I still love the 7M, I don't know, it has some sort of a, it's cool. In my opinion, it's cool because it's such an old piece of engineering that still works. And when you apply modern engineering to the engine, like sequential injection, and get rid of that cold fuel injector and you know, and you run coil on plug ignition and a modern ECU, it just responded so great. It ran great, and actually with that, even that fairly large turbo, it still made full boost by 3,700 RPM. I mean, it was crazy responsive. It ran so good, made great power, great spool. It was fun to drive, but the 2JZ is just more modern design, and it's going to work better for what I'm doing. So I hope that some of you continue to follow my channel, because I'll be following the 2JZ up with you guys. Because there are still questions on what do you need to do to get a 2JZ into a Mark III Supra. So I'll be going over a lot of that stuff on film. Sure, 9,000 people have covered that already, but here's another one. So I thank all of you for following me. I thank you so much for subscribing. We are at 899 as of this filming, so we are just getting close to 1,000. I hope that this will maybe bridge that gap up, get me to 1,000 subscribers, which would be great. So, so what has happened in the 2 years minus the Supra? Basically, same thing I've always been doing. Building engines. Did a Mazda Speed 3 this winter in a bigger project. You know, transmissions, all that sort of thing. But the biggest thing was a S10, a 93 Chevy S10. And that truck, our goal was a 7-second quarter mile this year, and we ended up on the last day, the very last day of the entire season that the track was going to be open. We struggled all year, because that's quite hard. It's hard enough with a car that's got, I don't want to say proper weight distribution, but much better than a pickup truck, especially when you're going drag racing and you've got no weight over the arse end. So that's a struggle, because not only getting the power to the ground, but also stability. Aerodynamics are atrocious. I mean, imagine driving your house down a drag strip. It's basically what it is. And it's just really hard to get it all to work right. And we had some components fail. Obviously, we were making around, towards the end of the year, around 1,380 brake horsepower. So it was going pretty fast. Big Garrett turbo, GTX 4720 Gen 2, which turned out to be much too small on the turbine side. So it was a struggle to make power. But we did end up with a 778 at 179 miles an hour. So we hit our goal straight off the trailer on the last day. We did a lot of 8th mile days because the weather wasn't cooperating. The very first pass off the trailer was a 785 at 168, something like that. And it just absolutely made the whole year worth it. That consumed most of my time throughout the summer. This summer. The summer before, we ended up going 8, let's see if I remember right here, we went 850 something, so we took off over half a second on our time, and so that's been a big project. Did some heads-up racing, you know, trying to get a groove down. Basically by the end of the year we had our groove down. I feel like we actually made 6-7 second passes in a row at the end of the year. The weekend before that was all 8th mile, and we were hitting them bang on straight down the track every time. We made 15 passes prior to the 7-second pass that just left straight, went straight down the track, and did perfect. So if that wasn't enough, that customer stated that he wanted 7s. And of course, what happens when you hit a goal, you set a new goal. So our goal for this year is 6s. Now it took an entire year to take 3/4 of a second off from 8s to 7s. And now we're going from 7s to 6s. It's another 3/4 of a second, but that 3/4 of a second is going to take roughly another 500 horsepower. So it's going to be really difficult to get this thing to do what we want, but we've got a lot of tricks up our sleeve. We're doing some more electronics, more data logging, more of that sort of thing. So I may have another video about that later if I see some interest for it. So if you want to hear more, if you want to follow that truck, if you want even footage from the racetrack, things like that, I'm not going to put anything up that people don't want to see. So if you'd like to see an S10 run 6 seconds at nearly 200 miles an hour, then tell me and I will bring it up. The other thing that I've been busy with of my own things, well, the Hyundai drag car is now sitting over in my shop here. It's got stripped out. I've taken another 250 pounds out of it, so now it's less than 2,000. It's probably around 1,850 currently. Now a cage is going to bring that up. That's going to be put off till next year. So right now my current project is obviously the 2JZ, but that's going to take a lot of money, which I'm not going to stick that much in it right now. So my current project is this 1991 Eagle Talon TSI all-wheel drive behind me. So I just got done painting the engine bay, and it turned out great. It's a Mitsubishi Electric blue with red pearl in the base coat, so it's not real noticeable, but hoping when you get it in the sun it's going to look quite alright. But so right now we've got the engine mocked up inside of the engine bay, as you can see. The color looks wonderful, if I do say so myself. I'm not a professional painter, but I do make it work. So yeah, it's going to be beautiful. The car, when it is actually this color, is going to be really nice. So why is the engine mocked up? Well, number of reasons, but mainly of which is I'm building my own exhaust manifold, downpipe, and intake. I bought a welder this year, TIG welder. Never welded my entire life, never welded at all, and I picked up a TIG welder. So basically it's to make the manifold on the 2JZ, but I thought, you know what, 4 cylinders easier than 6, so I'm going to do that first, get experience and practice on that, and then move to the Supra, the 2JZ. So yeah, that's my project. This is going to be an automatic car. It's now a manual car. I'm going to switch it to an auto. They'll handle more power, much easier to drive around town. I plan to use this as a daily driver. So this is going to be an auto, and it's got a GTX 3076 Garrett in it, Gen 1. So I'm expecting to make 550 to 600 wheel horsepower if I push it really hard. It's going to be a 2-liter 4G63 with a lot of supporting mods. Forge motor, all that stuff, but that's to come later. So I'm hoping that some of you will follow along with my DSM project. I plan to do videos on that as well, so we will follow along, and hopefully next time you see me I'll have a manifold done. So that is that, and once again I want to apologize that it's taken 2 years to get another video out, and I apologize for that. But it's just, here we are, right? We're back, and I hope a lot of you are excited to watch this. I know it's a lot of blabbing on, a lot of talking, but more content is to come. It's going to be very pretty, a lot of this stuff that's going to be in here. So I hope that a lot of you enjoy this. So yeah, the Supra. There you have it. So I promise it's not going to be 2 years until the next one comes out. So thank you all for watching and coming back to my channel. Have a good night.